kind of been pondering about calling it the welcome interview. It's essentially sitting down to, you obviously start with the basics of like, welcome, we're so excited to have you. I'm Vivien, I'm going to be your manager, that kind of stuff, and just chat about like the basics of why are we even here right now. It may sound like it's a common sense, like, yes, the new person has joined your company, has joined your team, they want to work with you, and first impressions are a two-way street. So you don't just have a first impression when you're meeting the candidate for the first time during the interview. The candidate is also having a first impression of the company, the team, and the day and the onboarding process and how the company functions as a whole.
Initiating becoming a hiring machine sequence in 3, 2, 1.
Hey everyone, it's Sam Keenley, and welcome to Becoming a Hiring Machine. This is the show dedicated to fixing recruitment by going beyond saying what needs to change and instead teaches you how to make that change. Today we've got a great Tactical Tuesday episode ahead of us, but before we get into that, I just want to tell you a little bit about the show. Essentially, we have shows within the show here. Some days we have interviews with industry thought leaders and others who are shaking up the space, while other days we cover things like trending topics. Every Tuesday, stop by for a Tactical Tuesday episode where we go deep on how to do something that's going to help you drive better results in your day-to-day. And occasionally you'll get a mic drop episode from Matt where he shares something that he's been thinking about within the recruitment space and wants you to know. All right, today's Tactical Tuesday. You've just placed or hired someone. Their first day is tomorrow. Are you or is your client ready? So today we're going to get tactical and dive into the getting started interview to help ensure that you or your client and the new team member are able to actually get off to a good start on the right foot and make sure that we're setting themselves up for success. So with that, let's get into that with our favorite Tactical Tuesday co-host, Vivien.
Hello.
Welcome back as always. Excited for this one. It's kind of building off of our last interview episode before this, but yeah, the getting started. I know we call it an interview, discussion, first day one, but this is one of those topics that, everyone thinks that they always do it right if they're doing it, but there's a lot of things that you've seen, that we've seen, that probably will be helpful for recruiters to think about, whether it's them using themselves or to inform their hiring manager, like, hey, make sure you touch on these during the day one. So don't want to steal your thunder, but yeah, let's get into this one.
Let's do it. Yeah, I've kind of been pondering about calling it the welcome interview, which is
there you go.
Weird, but it's essentially sitting down to, you obviously start with the basics of like, welcome, we're so excited to have you. I'm Vivien, I'm going to be your manager, that kind of stuff, and just chat about like the basics of why are we even here right now. It may sound like it's a common sense, like, yes, the new person has joined your company, has joined your team, they want to work with you, but there's nothing bad that happens when you rehash these things up front, because essentially whoever starts their first day, it's really memorable and it does set the expectations, and first impressions are a two-way street. So you don't just have a first impression when you're meeting the candidate for the first time during the interview. The candidate is also having a first impression of the company, the team, and the day and the onboarding process and how the company functions as a whole based on the first day, the first hour, the first week, the first month. And that's what ends up setting the foundation for the future ahead. And why wouldn't you want to start on a good foot?
Exactly.
And so it just starts with something as simple as like, just introduce yourself and kind of rehash, why are we even here today? And just cover the basics of like, just to kind of like recap, this is the role, these are kind of like the responsibilities and the basics, and we're going to dive into a little bit more of this throughout this welcome interview.
Mm-hmm. And this is so important / taken for granted / easily forgotten, because this is just as valuable for, the new first-time manager who hasn't done this before as the manager who's onboarded 20 people, and sometimes they just go through the motions and they'll forget a step, anything like that. Or, the CXO, the CEO, the whoever, that they don't have a lot of time in their day and they're just like, I just want to get through this as quickly as possible. It's like, no, you have to take the time to do this for each hire to make sure that you're setting them up for success. So this isn't focused on just one group. Like, it's a good reminder, it's a good learning curve, but everyone should absolutely benefit from having this type of a framework or a template to follow.
1000%. It opens up the communication channels. It builds trust from the get-go because you're giving them everything that they need to know up front. You're chatting through all the different things. So some of it is just going to be, okay, this is like I'm your manager. This is what I do. This is kind of like what the team is. This is the purpose of the team. This is the project that we're currently working on. These are all of your different team members. And obviously all of this information is going to be a lot at the very beginning because it's so new. And so it's going to be really hard for the candidate to retain all of that information. But it sets a solid foundation where you've covered the basics, where they have enough information. And the information that they have will then share their experience and perspective and how they interpret things moving forward. Because in the absence of information, people start making stuff up. And my favorite example of that is when you're at the airport and your flight is delayed. All of a sudden you hear chatter of like, the wheel fell off in Chicago or something like that. Like crazy conspiracy theories start happening in the absence of information. And you see this with news, you see this all the time. Don't give your candidate that opportunity, because it takes one employee that just might have a bad day that will sour that whole relationship from the start. You want to be the first one that plants the positive seeds and then nurtures them throughout. And that's what this welcome interview essentially does.
Mm-hmm. All right. So the different steps of the interview, you already touched on, we'll call it like the introduction, where it's like you're welcoming the person, going over some of that. So what are the following steps that you'd recommend people cover as part of this?
Yep. So obviously the first one is introduce yourself, introduce the role to the candidate almost kind of. And then you want to expand from that, because you're starting with like the tiny little nucleus, and then you want to expand out to the team and what are their functions? What is the team dynamic? What is everybody's roles? A little bit into like their personality, because people have different communication styles, different tempers. They deal with different situations in different ways, and you're going to know this. And instead of it being like a complete surprise, so if you know that somebody is very short-tempered in high stress situations, give them a little bit of a heads up so that they're not like super freaked out. Obviously, it's not always ideal to have somebody who's very like hot-tempered on your team, but the reality is that there's different people, they work differently, and they deal with circumstances and stress in different ways. And you want to kind of give like a culture, the team dynamic, the roles, and how everybody kind of collaborates. What is the process of collaboration? Are you just kind of like hopping around each other's desks? Are you working together in the conference room all the time? Do you have like weekly meetings? Whatever that kind of is, give a little bit of insights into that. And something else that is super important is throughout the process, as you're covering each bullet, check in with the candidate to see if they have any questions. And the best advice for that one is don't ask, do you have any questions? Don't ask yes or no questions. Ask open-ended ones, such as, what questions do you have about me or your role? What questions do you have about the team? Have you worked in a team like this before? Have you worked on a project like this before? Obviously, a lot of this is already going to be covered during the interview. But now that you're explaining things, you're asking the same question again, you're giving them the context of the team where they can start visualizing my past experience fits into this today now. Because during the interview, that's a hypothetical. Whereas once they're actually hired on the job, on site, in the office, they're thinking about this a little bit differently. You can help visualize their own path within the company and the team. Next up, we got goals and success metrics. The biggest thing and the best thing that you can do is setting expectations from the get-go, how they will be evaluated, what they will be evaluated on, what the expectations are, and checking in with them to see, hey, does this align with your past experience? Is this something that you think you can do? Do you want to change some of these things? What is your professional experience with this? There's going to be instances where you are hiring a professional that has much more experience with something than you as, let's say, the project manager or something like that. And this is where you want to invite them to add their own input. And even if they don't have a whole lot of information to start with, they can still give their insights and say, you know what, in the past, my experience has been that a project like this takes 6 months. You're budgeting 3 months for this. What am I missing here? And you can start having that conversation, and that's really good to kind of have the first day. And next up, you want to chat through the support and the resources that are available to them. Obviously, they're going to need to get some kind of onboarding, and it's not just the HR onboarding, but what is the process of the team? What is the tech stack that they will be using? What is like the internal communication channels? What are the best practices? Where can they find the different resources and processes and documents and things like that, or like past examples? Where can they find all of this? There's always some kind of like SharePoint, some kind of wiki, some kind of like shared folder that they need to have access to. And for them, it's going to be brand new. So you have to baby step them through this because everything is brand new. And yes, they can research it on their own time and things like that. Why not set them up for success and kind of spend an extra couple of minutes to walk them through this and show them how to find certain things just so that they at least have an introduction to it. And then we got 2 more. It is feedback and communication. So this is where you want to check in and say, hey, we're at the beginning. We're going to meet weekly to check in and see on your progress, any questions that you have. I'm going to introduce you to your buddy or your mentor. This is going to be your go-to person with this for XYZ reason. And you also want to then check in and say, hey, do you have any questions or concerns about this? What are they? Let's walk through this. But ideally, you want to do this throughout the process. And that wraps up the welcome interview.
Yeah, and it's not overly complicated, but again, just having a good structure, make sure you touch on those course things to set them up for success. That's what you want to do at the end of the day. You know, you can obviously add your own flavor, different elements that are unique to the role, the company, whatever else it is. But if you start with these foundational items, it keeps it pretty simple. So let's do a little bonus add on here. So questions, like let's think about what are some different questions that we could ask. I mean, any part of this, I'll defer to you here, but I know you were talking about earlier, like don't ask binary yes, no questions, but what are a few examples of ones that people might not be asking or might not think to include that you would say you'd recommend to add into the mix?
Yeah, you could use something like, what are your initial thoughts on your role and your responsibilities that we've outlined? What can I clarify for you about the project and the team? How does this role and the project align with your expectations and your previous experiences? How do you feel about the information that we've shared so far? What information would be most helpful for you moving forward? And is there any part of your role or our discussion that you would like to dive a little bit more deeper into? Because you really just want to start with like the cliff notes and dive a little bit into it and check in with them of how much information do they even want to have? And depending on that, let them kind of guide the discussion in terms of how deep you want to get into it. But this is essentially an outline that you then want to dive a little bit deeper into with your weekly meetings that you ideally should be having at least once a week for the first month, if actually not the first quarter. The first 90 days are always super crucial because it really does take 90 days to fully arrive at the company. The first month is really just figuring out what's happening, how everything is happening. Month 2 is when people kind of start figuring out, okay, how do I fit into this? How can I contribute? What's my rhythm? And month 3 is when people start feeling a little bit more comfortable and at home almost, and they find their own little stride. So for the first 3 months, you really want to meet weekly to revisit all of these different points and topics because their experiences and just their time and their exposure to the different parts of the team are going to shape what they're doing. They're going to have follow-up questions, and you want to have that door open so that when it's time to go over stay interviews, you have a solid foundation to build on.
Love it. And that seems like a not so subtle spoiler alert for what next week's episode will be. So no, these are good. They're really helpful. And again, sometimes we all know the things that we should be doing, but it's how do I do it? What are some how do I kind of skip the 0 to 80 part and just do the 80 to 100? So hopefully this gives people a good framework to start off with, some good questions to either take or put their own flavor on to incorporate into what they do. But yeah, I know this is something that every manager, again, whether you're just getting started, have had a team for a long time, or you just want to, pull something together pretty quickly, we'll give you a good framework to get started. So Vivien, thank you as always for joining and sharing all of this.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. All right. So as we wrap, Becoming a Hiring Machine is a production of Loxo. If you love this episode, but you're not sure where to go next, we've got a link to a similar one in the show notes of the description of your favorite podcast streaming platform, as well as on our website, loxo.co/podcasts. All right, everyone. That's the show. That was yet another incredible Tactical Tuesday with Vivien. Until next time. Bye, y'all.